You've been told that dinosaurs were the undisputed kings of prehistory, that they showed up and instantly ruled the Earth. But that is a lie. If you travel back to the Triassic, you'll see the ancestors of the T-Rex running for their lives. And they aren't running from another dinosaur. They are being hunted by a crocodile. But this isn't the lazy river log you know. This monster sprints on 2 legs, has a skull like a hatchet, and for millions of years, it treated the dinosaurs like chicken nuggets. Meet the Postosuchus. Imagine for a second that I've dropped you into the middle of a dense, humid fern forest about 220 million years ago. It's the late Triassic. The air is thick, hot, and smells vaguely of rotting vegetation and impending doom. You're standing on the supercontinent of Pangea, in a region that will one day become the painted desert of Arizona. Suddenly, the bushes crash open. A small, agile creature darts past your leg. It's got scales, a long tail, and it runs on 2 legs. Aha! You think. A dinosaur, the ruler of the prehistoric world. You assume you are witnessing the dawn of the dinosaur empire, where T-Rex's ancestors are stomping around owning the place. But you've been lied to. See, pop culture has convinced us that as soon as the first dinosaur evolved, they slapped on a crown and ruled the Earth for 150 million years uninterrupted. But in the Triassic, dinosaurs were the underdogs. They were the scrappy, nervous little guys hiding in the bushes, trying desperately not to get eaten. They weren't the kings of the jungle. They were the chicken nuggets. The real kings were the Postosuchians, the false crocodiles. And the monster chasing that little dinosaur? It isn't another dinosaur. It's a walking nightmare called Postosuchus. This wasn't some sluggish, belly-dragging swamp log like the crocodiles you see at the zoo today. This thing was a landlocked biological tank. Scientists have debated for decades about the exact moment these croc-line archosaurs split from the bird-line archosaurs, the dinosaurs. But one thing is visually obvious. Nature was experimenting with some truly terrifying designs. While early dinosaurs were barely the size of a modern dog, the Postosuchians had already unlocked the cheat codes for apex predation. They were big, they were everywhere, and, most disturbingly, some of them had figured out how to stand up and run. So, let's talk about the beast itself. The name is Postosuchus, which sounds like a spell from Harry Potter, but actually just means crocodile from Post. Yes, it was named after the town of Post, Texas. It's a bit like discovering Godzilla and naming him the lizard from Cleveland. But don't let the underwhelming name fool you. This thing was absolute nightmare fuel. If you stood next to a full-grown Postosuchus, you'd be looking at a creature about 13 to 16 feet long. That's 4 to 5 meters. To put that in perspective, imagine a Honda Civic, but instead of airbags and cup holders, it's made of muscle, osteoderms, and bad attitude. The first fossils were dug up in the 1980s, and initially paleontologists were a bit confused. And honestly, can you blame them? The skull of this animal doesn't look like a crocodile skull at all. Modern crocs have flat, wide heads, perfect for lurking just below the waterline like a floating log. Postosuchus had a skull that was tall, deep, and narrow, basically a hatchet made of bone. It was packed with rows of serrated, curved teeth that were designed for slicing through meat and crushing bone, not holding on to slippery fish. Now for the part nobody expects. If you looked at a skeleton of Postosuchus in a museum without reading the placard, you would bet your entire life savings that you were looking at a Tyrannosaurus rex ancestor. It has the big, blocky head, the short arms, and the long tail. It's the classic therapeutic dinosaur shape. But this is where nature pulls a fast one. Postosuchus is what scientists call an example of convergent evolution. It's basically nature inventing the T-Rex design tens of millions of years before the T-Rex actually existed, but using crocodile parts to do it. It belongs to a group called the Triassic. These were the heavy hitters of the Triassic. While the ancestors of the T-Rex were still scampering around looking like anorexic turkeys, the Triassic had already maximized the giant biting death machine build. Scientists still argue whether Postosuchus hunted alone or in packs. The fossil record is frustratingly vague here. Some experts look at the brain case and suggest they had the sensory processing for coordinated hunting, while others say, look, these things were likely way too aggressive to tolerate a roommate. One of the coolest, slightly fringe details about this animal is its armor. Unlike the smooth skin of a T-Rex, Postosuchus kept a little souvenir from its crocodilian heritage, rows of bony plates called osteoderms running down its back. So, not only was it an apex predator with a skull like a sledgehammer, but it was also wearing a bulletproof vest. It was an evolutionary tank designed to dominate a world that was hotter, drier, and harsher than anything we know today. Here is where things get a little complicated and, frankly, a little weird. We've established that Postosuchus was a tank, but how did this tank move? If you picture a crocodile today, you picture a sprawler. Their legs stick out to the sides like they're doing a permanent push-up. This is great for stability, but terrible for endurance running. But Postosuchus? It looked at that design and said, no thanks. This animal possessed something called the Pillar-Erect hip stance. Unlike dinosaurs, whose legs dropped straight down from the hips like mammals, and unlike lizards, whose legs sprawled to the side, Triassic like Postosuchus had a hip socket that faced downwards. Their femur, thigh bone, locked in vertically to create a pillar. This meant they could support massive weight directly underneath them without getting tired. It's an engineering marvel that allowed them to grow huge without their bellies dragging in the dirt. Here's the thing, though. For decades, every paleo artist drew Postosuchus walking on all four legs. It made sense. It's a heavy animal. Surely it needs 4 pillars to hold up that massive head. But then, scientists started looking closer at the front limbs. They were tiny. Disturbingly tiny. The forelimbs were roughly half the size of the hind limbs. If Postosuchus tried to walk on all fours, it would look like it was constantly walking downhill. This led to a radical shift in how we see this monster. Many paleontologists now argue that Postosuchus was actually bipedal. That's right, a 15-foot crocodile relative sprinting on 2 legs, chasing you down like a reptilian linebacker. This wasn't a clumsy waddle either. The ankle structure of these creatures is fascinating and crucial. It's called the crurotarsal ankle. In plain English, the ankle joint allows for a twisting motion. Dinosaurs have a simple hinge ankle, up and down, which is great for running in a straight line. But the crocodile line ankle allows for rotation. This suggests that while the dinosaurs were built for pure speed, pseudosuchians were built for agility and grappling. Postosuchus could likely turn on a dime, making it terrifyingly effective in the dense forests of the Triassic. However, historians and scientists still argue whether this bipedalism was a permanent feature. Was it an obligate biped, always on 2 legs, or a facultative biped, mostly on 4, but could rear up to sprint or attack? The debate rages on. Some biomechanical studies suggest that while the babies might have been speedy little bipeds, the adults became so heavy they might have reverted to a quadrupedal stance just to support their own bulk. It's like how bear cubs climb trees easily, but a full-grown grizzly usually stays on the ground unless it has a very good reason not to. But let's lean into the bipedal theory for a moment, because it paints a truly alien picture. Imagine the sheer kinetic energy of a half-ton reptile balancing on two powerful hind legs, using a thick, muscular tail as a counterbalance. It's an anatomical solution that nature usually reserves for dinosaurs. Yet here was a crocodile cousin rocking the look millions of years early. This hip and ankle combination gave them a distinct advantage over the early dinosaurs. In a sprint, a dinosaur might be faster, but in a wrestling match, the Postosuchus had the stability and the torque to throw its weight around. It was the difference between a sprinter and a sumo wrestler. And in the rough-and-tumble world of the Triassic, you didn't always need to be the fastest. Sometimes you just needed to be the one who could stay standing when the fight started. So, what did a typical Tuesday look like for our bipedal nightmare? It mostly involved bullying the rest of the ecosystem. The menu in the late Triassic was surprisingly varied, but the main course was likely a creature called Prehistory. Imagine a hippopotamus crossed with a turtle, but give it a beak and two downward-pointing tusks. These were huge, lumbering dicynodonts, basically walking sausages that congregated in herds near water sources. They were heavy and strong, but against a high-speed impact from a Postosuchus, they didn't stand a chance. The hunting strategy was likely shock and awe. Postosuchus wasn't a marathon runner, it was an ambush sprinter. It would burst from the fern cover using that powerful tail and those pillar-erect legs to generate massive acceleration, slamming into its prey with the force of a small truck. Then you have the early dinosaurs, like Coelophysis. These guys were everywhere, fast, lightweight, and desperate. In the eyes of a Postosuchus, a dinosaur wasn't a rival, it was a snack. Or, more likely, a nuisance. You can picture Postosuchus bringing down a massive Prehistory, only to have a dozen little dinosaurs swarming around waiting for scraps, like seagulls at a beach picnic. To maintain this lifestyle, Postosuchus needed top-tier hardware. Its skull suggests it had a phenomenal sense of smell. Inside that hatchet-shaped head, the olfactory bulbs were well developed. It could likely smell a herd of Prehistory or a rotting carcass from miles away. But you've been lied to. We tend to assume that because it's a crocodile, it must have been a sluggish, cold-blooded reptile that needed to sunbathe for 3 hours before it could move. You know, like a solar-powered calculator that needs to charge up. But looking at the bone growth rates of Postosuchus and its relatives, the story changes. Many scientists now believe these animals had a metabolism much closer to warm-blooded mammals than modern reptiles. They grew fast. They moved fast. They dominated every niche. A cold-blooded animal simply cannot maintain the energy output required to be the active bipedal apex predator of a supercontinent. Evolution doesn't build a Ferrari engine and then put it in a chassis that can't start on a cloudy day. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate. If they were high energy and possibly warm-blooded, what covered their skin? Historians and scientists still argue whether some of these high-metabolism archosaurs might have had some form of insulation. While we have plenty of evidence for scales and osteoderms, armor plates, there is a quiet, controversial whisper in the paleo community asking if they could have had primitive filaments, a sort of proto-fuzz to trap heat. Most evidence points to them being scaly tanks, but the mere fact that we have to ask the question shows just how far removed these things were from the lazy alligators you see today. This high-octane lifestyle was their greatest strength. It allowed them to grow to 1,000 pounds and treat the Triassic dinosaurs like chew toys. But in the grand, cruel joke of evolution, this high-performance engine was exactly what would eventually doom them. So, if Postosuchus was the ultimate land predator, bigger, stronger, and meaner than the early dinosaurs, Why aren't we all running from bipedal crocodiles today? Why did the dinosaurs inherit the Earth? The answer lies in one of the most violent events in Earth's history, the end Triassic extinction about 201 million years ago. Pangea began to rip apart. Massive rift valleys opened up, unleashing the Central Atlantic magmatic province eruptions. This wasn't just a few volcanoes popping off. It was a flood of lava that covered millions of square miles, pumping insane amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere. The world went from hot and dry to greenhouse nightmare. The climate swung wildly. Ecosystems collapsed. The herds of placerias vanished. Now for the part nobody expects. The superior biology of Postosuchus is exactly what killed it. Being a massive, high-performance, high-metabolism apex predator is fantastic when the grocery store is full. But when the food runs out, you are the first to starve. Postosuchus was the Hummer H2 of the Triassic. Powerful and impressive, but a total gas guzzler. The dinosaurs, on the other hand, they were the Toyota Priuses. They were small, scrappy, and needed way less food to survive. While the giant running crocs starved to death, waiting for a steak that never came, the early dinosaurs could survive on scraps, insects, and roots. Scientists still argue whether the dinosaurs had a secret weapon, specifically their respiratory system. Some evidence suggests that the flow through lungs of dinosaurs, similar to modern birds, allowed them to breathe more efficiently in the low oxygen air of the post-volcanic world, giving them the edge while the crocs gasped for air. When the dust settled and the Jurassic Period began, the land-dwelling crocodile cousins were gone. The dinosaurs looked around, realized the bullies had vanished, and proceeded to get absolutely massive. But don't feel too bad for the crocodile lineage. While Postosuchus died out, its smaller, aquatic cousins survived. They looked at the chaos on land, slid into the water, and decided to wait it out. They traded the ability to sprint on two legs for the ability to hold their breath and crush bones. And considering that crocodiles are still here today, watching us from the riverbanks while the T-Rex is just a museum exhibit, maybe they won the long game after all. And that is the story of the time crocodiles tried to be dinosaurs and almost pulled it off. If you want to see more creatures that evolution seemingly built by accident, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the weirdest corners of prehistory.